Welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today the Poison Pen is honored to have with us debut novelist Jess Armstrong, whose book, The Curse of Penryth Hall, has won the Mystery Writers of America's most recent First Crime Fiction Award. Before we begin, I'd like to let those tuning in know the Poison Pen will have a limited number of signed copies of The Curse of Penryth Hall. And if you'd like one, please give us a call or go online. We'd be happy to hold one for you or put one in the mail while supplies last. Now I'd like to welcome Jess Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's very
Thank you.
exciting.
Thank you for joining us. I'm always fascinated by authors before they became published because there's almost a story there too. What can you tell us about Jess before you became a published author?
Oh gosh. I think I've been writing pretty much my whole life, but I did stop for a while. The earliest memories I have of my childhood, I was writing books. I can remember being maybe like 4 years old and drawing these strange cat books that I would have, and I would put them on the back of the table. And my mother probably was exhausted by me running out of staples and paper, but I was very proud of my books, and I was always writing. And then I got really big into poetry in school, and I was writing these. It was funny. I actually was talking to I have two children. I was talking to my son. He's like, "When did you decide you wanted to write murder mysteries, Mom?" And I was like, with this book. And then I forgot that I actually started one of my first novels was it was almost like a X-Files fan fiction in middle school because I was huge into X-Files. And so I was writing these like detective novels when I was like 13 years old. And I'd forgotten completely about them. And as I got older, I just kind of went on and I went to college and I got busy, and then I went to graduate school, and I got tired of writing for me because I was writing for school and I was doing so much that I kind of put that part of my life away. And I didn't write again until I was probably 34 years old. So
Hmm.
I went a huge span of time without writing creatively. Um, I got my master's in 2008, right when the economy crashed. And so instead of going into museums, I went
Mhm.
into like jobs that would actually
Okay.
be able to pay me.
Mhm.
And so I just kind of got away from that world, and I got married and I had kids. And it wasn't until I had my second child that I actually came back around to writing. And I had this moment, and I was like standing in the kitchen, and I was like, I'm 34 years old. I'm too old to start writing, because you see all these people that are like 19, they're 20, they're 25, these young debut writers. And I'm like a mom. I can't, like, when am I going to do this? And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, who says I can't do this? And so I just sat down one day and decided I was going to write a book. And that book got me my first agent. It didn't sell. I had, oh gosh, this is slightly embarrassing, but I had written, I think, 3 or 4 books that were historical women's fiction.
Mhm.
And they weren't mysteries at all. And I was trying to break into that market, and it just was not working because my books were almost mysteries, because
Oh.
they towed a little bit into mystery, but they weren't quite this and they weren't quite that.
Mhm.
And so I ended up very amicably, I parted with my first agent because I my books weren't selling. And so this book came about. I wrote it because I wrote a book for me. I was tired of writing books. And I was tired of writing books that I thought were going to sell that didn't. And I'm like, I'm going to write what I want to read. I'm going to write the most bonkers, fun, gothic romp that I can dream up. And I was like, I want to write a gothic romp because I didn't want it to take itself too seriously. I wanted to be a little fun, a little tongue in cheek, but I wanted it to be a gothic novel. And I'm like, what in the world am I doing writing this book? Like, who writes a funny gothic novel? I don't know. And it's not it's not funny all the time, but it's
No.
not also taking itself too seriously either.
Mhm.
And so I ended up submitting it to the first crime novel contest, and
Mhm.
that's how I got here. And I had no expectations of it because it was this book. I'm like, what did I just write? Like, it's a mystery. There's a dead body.
For those that might not be familiar with the contest, it's held by the Mystery Writers of America. And what exactly is involved with that when you submit it and then you actually win?
So the contest opens in December. So it's open, I think it may be open right now. So anybody with a completed mystery manuscript, if you've never been published, and you can submit to the contest, and it's judged by Mystery Writers of America and Minotaur Books. And they select a winner, but I don't think they always select a winner every year. I don't think they do. But if they do, then you get a traditional publishing contract. And that's where this book came from. So yeah,
Yeah.
I submitted it in December, and I found out it was March. It was the end of March. I found out I got a call from my editor, and it was like from a New York number. And I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be spam. But you know how your iPhone says possible spam? It
Mhm.
didn't say possible spam. And so I'm like, I'm going to regret this. I'm going to regret answering this call. But I didn't. It was like the best, like, random number I've ever answered.
So that brought you publication for The Curse of Penryth Hall. What can you tell us about the book without spoiling anything?
Yeah, so the book takes place in 1922 Cornwall. My heroine is Ruby Vaughn. She is a disgraced American heiress who is living with this very eccentric 80-year-old bookseller in Exeter. And he sends her off on these ridiculous jobs to carry books to people, to go appraise manuscripts. So she has this very interesting skill set. She's interested in things. She's an antiquarian herself, and she is very bored with life. Like she's had a hard go of it. Her family was killed on the Lusitania, and she was in the Great Wars, an ambulance driver, and so she's just kind of bitter and broken after
Disillusioned,
the
yeah.
war. Yeah, after the war, and so she's just kind of hanging out in Exeter, and he sends her off to Cornwall with this box of books. While she's there, she's confronted by the woman she used to love. Her best friend and her former lover, Tamsin Turner, who married Sir Edward, who is a baronet in Cornwall. And so she goes out to deliver these books, and while she's there, she stops in to see Tamsin, who she hadn't seen in, I think, 3 years, after Tamsin married Sir Edward. When she's there, it's dreadful. It's awful. She's concerned for Tamsin. The next morning, Edward has been brutally murdered, and Ruby is determined to figure out who did it.
It's an amazing book because it blends a lot of different elements. There is mystery in it, there is a hint of the supernatural, there's a little bit of romance too. And when you talked about your fascination with the X-Files, that kind of explains a lot of what's going on in the book. Um, how did you work all these elements in together? Because they all have to meld in the end.
It was hard, actually, because I wanted to treat the supernatural as if it wasn't like magic for the sake of magic, or supernatural, like the ghost for the sake of ghost. I wanted it to fit naturally into this world. And I wanted Ruby to be a skeptic, which she's a huge skeptic at the beginning of the book. Um, and so it was really a balancing act. And I have to admit, so the one of the main characters is Ruin Kivel, who is basically considered the village curse breaker. He is a peller. He is supposed to be able to figure out, is this a curse or isn't this a curse? And he really is the reason this book took the supernatural bend that it took, because I wanted initially Ruby to be a folklorist. So I wanted her to be, I knew I wanted to deal with folklore, and I wanted her to be the one that was the expert. And when I was doing my research to figure out who Ruby was, I kept coming across Pellers. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need one. I need this character in my book. And so once I put him in there, he just kind of started eating up pages, and he was taking over. And so he kind of infused the plot with the supernaturalness. And it really kind of brought the is there, isn't there a curse really to the forefront of it.
It's done very well. And for readers who read mysteries and think, that's not part of the genre, there are actually precedents for this book. I kept going back to The Hound of the Baskervilles, and you always wonder whether or not Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was making that real or just kind of hinting at the supernatural. So you do have some precedent for that in the book.
That was my big worry actually with this book was had I gone too far. um but yeah, it's
Even today, there's authors like, I think early on, Simone St. James did some books that kind of have elements of mystery or danger or suspense. And then there's also the supernatural and a little bit of romance.
I'm a huge Simone St. James fan. Like it's funny, I didn't discover her until after I had started working on this book, and somebody mentioned her, and I started reading her post-war book, the ones that are set in the 20s, and I just inhaled them. They're so good. Like her character work is just amazing.
Another interesting thing about the book is the historical time period, the 1920s, because that was a period of change too, much like during World War II and after, women were given a lot more roles to play.
Right. And I actually find the time period super interesting in and of itself, because you look at the First World War and you're starting a war basically where you have mounted cavalry at the beginning of the war and you have airplanes at the end of the war. And if you think about that, it's just mind blowing. Like the technological advances that happen in 4 years is just incredible. And then to try and imagine living in this world where you had these imperial structures that had been in place for hundreds of years. Like the map of Europe had been very much, I mean, it had changed over time, but like you had royal families, you had these imperial powers. This is what the world had been like. And then all of a sudden that's just cracked. And how do people make sense of that world? And to me, that was really fascinating about the time period. And layering into that, like the progress of women starting to get the vote in different places, women trying to break free of these kind of patriarchal structures. It's just really interesting to me. Yeah. And so I really wanted to set it in this time, but I also didn't want to write a history book. So I was like, I didn't want it to take itself too seriously.
You don't, but you also, I mean, I think you do respect the time period, and I'm guessing that comes from your background, your academic background in American history. How did you go about researching the time period? Was there particular sources that you found useful? How do you strike the balance between fiction and nonfiction?
That is a very good question. So for me, I have this kind of fascination with the First World War. And so long before I started writing this book, I was reading like history books. There's this one really great book, Wounded, that is, I forget who writes it, but she's a lady writer, she's a historian, and it looks at the medicine during the First World War through the different positions in the war. So you'd have like regimental medical officers, you'd have stretcher bearers, you'd have nurses, and it would be like a chapter that takes these stories, these people that talk about the war through the lens of medicine. It is just this groundbreaking. Like to me, I thought this was just like, this book blew me away. And like, it's so smart. Emily Mayhew. I'm pretty sure her name's Emily Mayhew. Oh my gosh, such a great, and it's like a scholarly book, but it's just so fascinating. And it really gets into the human aspect of the war. And so I would read books like that. I would read memoirs. Like I read Siegfried Sassoon. I read Robert Graves. That's like, I did my sad war poets phase. Like I was really, really into it. Because I really wanted to understand these people, because the time period was so interesting. And I'm like, what was it like to live through that? And so I had been reading and reading and reading about this world for years before I read this book. And so the historical part was really kind of easier for me because I already had this kind of base level of knowledge of what the world would have been like in those first years after the war. But so it was a lot of fact checking more than anything else. The folklore aspect was a lot harder for me because I had to go actually do my primary source research. I was, well, sort of secondary. Well, what I was doing is I was reading folklorists from like 100 years ago and 200 years ago and reading their accounts to hear the stories they're collecting. So it's kind of like not quite primary source. It's like sort of collected oral histories maybe written down. I don't know how you classify that. Like it's, but yeah.
I admit I don't know a lot about folklore, probably very little, but I'm guessing that there are certain elements that are unique to certain geographic areas. So, like, I guess one place might have pixies, and another one might have trolls and things, all those different things. What was it about Cornwall that made its folklore unique?
It was funny to me is that it was different. It was slightly different. Like when you look at like every every place has its own folklore. And I was looking, I didn't want something that was super overdone, like something that people had done over and over again. And so I had moved away from Scotland. Like I love Scotland. It's like, but I was like, I'm not sure I want to do up here. There's been a lot of books set in Scotland. I don't really want to do that. And I really wanted to do Wales. And so I started looking into Welsh folklore until I found my Peller. And I found the Peller and I'm like, oh, wait, I'm going further south. And it was really, once I found that, I was just basically literally flipping through folklore books, like looking for where I wanted to set it. That was something that just hadn't been overdone. It was a complete accident, to be honest.
Happy accident,
A
I
very
guess.
happy accident, but it was a complete accident that I set it in Cornwall.
Setting is also important in the book. It's almost a character in itself, in the Curse of Penryth Hall. Why Cornwall? I have some ideas, but I'll let you kind of tell us.
It was the folklore really that moved it, but also it's just so beautiful. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to Cornwall. Oh my gosh. Like, it is just the most beautiful place I think I've ever seen in my life. And I went to Tintagel actually. I was at Tintagel last summer, and it was like, it was just breathtaking. Like everywhere you turn, if even it's raining, like we were at Tintagel last summer, and it had like all weather patterns in one moment. Like it was sunny, it was cloudy, it was raining and spitting, it was hot and it was cold, all in like a 4 hour span, and it was just so incredible. I had never like really found a place so beautiful in my life than when we went. And then even like we spent a day, we went to Bodmin Moor later on, and it was like my summer of trekking around, because it was 2 summers ago now. But it's just like this magically beautiful place. And if I had not have already decided where I was setting the book, like I would have written 100 more books set there just because it's so beautiful.
As you've said, and as other readers and reviewers and writers have mentioned, there's an element of Gothic to the book. How do you define Gothic? Because that can take a lot of different directions.
Yeah, I to me, Gothic, there's secrets. So it's this kind of this long longevity of secrets, of having like secrets and past and like things that have to unwind, and also the connection between the past trauma and the present. And to me, that's really there's like this underscore of trauma between past and present to your current problem that makes something kind of Gothic. There's also, to me, also there's like a psychological element, like this kind of questioning of madness, like of your own sanity, of questioning your own beliefs in a way that's different than just like a regular questioning of your beliefs, like questioning of like, are my perceptions even accurate?
Mm-hmm.
As Gothic too. And then it's moody. Like Gothic novels are just all moody. It's like there's like gotta be, I mean, there are always
Mm-hmm.
exceptions to the rules, but there's like gotta be a creepy house. There's gotta be a woman in danger. There
Mhm.
has to be morally gray figures of some sort. If we don't have somebody dramatically in danger, I don't think it's a gothic novel.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
maybe it is, but like there's these elements to it that are common in a lot of gothic novels. And
yeah.
so
It was wonderful, the way you managed them all. Let's talk about the writing process because you mentioned that you had tried writing before The Curse of Penryth Hall. So this was not your first stab at writing a novel, but it is under the broad genre of mystery. So I'm guessing, and comes from a reader's perspective, that you kind of have to know certain things when you start out, like who the victim is, who the suspects are, how you want to shift misdirection in the story. But there are some authors who say, no, I just sit down and let the story go. What was it like writing this book?
this book, it was an adventure. I am a notorious pantser. I vaguely know who did it. So I know who done it. Usually that's the hardest part. Um, I do not always know why. And my red herrings, I really have to try really hard. So almost every time on my first draft, I don't have enough red herrings. And so I always end up having to add them back in. Um, but yeah, to tell you a little bit about my process, I'm also not a chronological writer. So I write
Oh,
completely out of order, which is not something I would advocate if you're trying to learn to write. And if it works for you, great.
mhm.
If it does not work for you, please do not try to make it work for you because it's just the way my brain works. I'll be working on a scene and then I'll be like, oh wait, I need to make so and so go over here and do this. And then I'll go pop over like 5 chapters back and move a character around, make notes to myself. Sometimes a bit of dialogue will pop into my head, and so I'll go boom, I'll go flip somewhere else. It's totally chaotic. I don't know why it works.
Hmm,
It makes revision a mess, but in the end, it turns out all right.
hmm. That's interesting. You're right. Every author has their own approach, and you have to find what works for you. You've now published your first book. If you could go back to when you were first starting out, what advice would you give yourself as a starting writer?
That's a good question. Um, Hang in there because this industry, the process, all of it's very hard. There are so many good books out there that are just waiting to be discovered. And it does not reflect on you if your book doesn't get picked up, that it's all getting the right book in front of the right person at the right time. And it's really just like, hang in there. If you want to write this book, if you want to break into the industry, just keep trying. And that is, I think, what I would have told myself, and not to take it personally. Like, not to take publishing personally. You really got to grow a thick skin in the process. And I did not start out with a thick skin.
It's really hard, I think, for people
Mhm.
because there are things you can control and the things you can't control. And you're right, it's a matter of talent and luck and timing and everything clicking into place. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about Jess as a reader. You've talked about your writing life. Who were some of the authors that over the years you've come back to and think, wow, I didn't realize this author was so important to me as a reader?
Oh my gosh. I have been reading, like, I have been a bookworm my whole life. And so it's really hard to pick authors.
Mhm.
Um, I was obsessed with Anne Rice, which probably should be no surprise,
Mhm.
knowing what I write, that I was obsessed with Anne Rice for most of my teen years. Come to think of it, Anne Rice and Stephen King. This makes a lot of sense now, doesn't it?
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, Also, the number of Patricia Cornwell books I read probably also makes a whole lot of sense in retrospect. I never actually thought about that until this moment. Lately, I started actually reading a lot of romance, actually,
Okay.
in like maybe like 2016. Like, I they made me happy. Like, I love
Yeah.
genre books. I love genre books because they make me happy. They've got, like, I know at the end the bad guy is going to get it
Mhm.
and the love interest will be together. And that's why I love genre. I need that. I need to know that if I'm putting the emotional investment into what I'm reading, I need to know that everything's going to be okay by the end. And that, to me, that's really important. And I know everybody has their own taste, but for me, like, that's why I love genre. Like, the genre promise makes me happy. And I'll go on any adventure with any character so long as I know that in the end I'm going to be safe. And that's also one of the things I love. We were talking about Simone St. James earlier, because she has this ability to scare you to death, but in the
Yes.
end, you're safe.
Mhm.
Everything ends up okay at
Mhm.
the end of the book. And it's this ride. And oh my gosh, I've had to sleep with my lights on after reading one of
Yes.
her books because they're terrifying.
Oh, the one about the school for girls. It was like, oh my God, that one. Yeah.
The one that I made the mistake of reading when I was spending the night, we were visiting family in Indiana. We were in the farm. It's very dark in the country.
Hmm.
And I'm upstairs all by myself reading, oh, is it Silence for the Dead, that's
Yeah.
set at like the hospital for the
Hmm.
war wounded. Oh
Hmm.
my gosh, that book scared me to death. I'm like, great. I'm like hiding under a blanket reading this book on my phone, and I could not put it down. I'm like,
Yeah.
what am I doing to myself?
Hmm.
But she's amazing. I'm a huge
Yeah.
fan.
But at the end, things are going to come together. So
That's
you
why I
are
had to keep
willing.
reading. I had to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It's different if everyone dies and then you're like, okay, that was not worth 3 hours of my life or something. But yeah. So what other newish authors have you found that you are saying you should read this?
Oh gosh, what did I just read recently? I actually been reading older books. Like I read not older, but Diana Biller's Widow of
Yes,
Rosefall.
that's another wonderful Gothic.
Love that book. And Diana Biller's another one of those writers. It's just like, oh, I would follow her anywhere.
Hmm.
Um, I'm reading an arc of one of my friends, A Sweet Sting of Salt. It's also a Gothic. It's coming out in the spring. It's a feminist retelling of the Selkie wife. And it's beautiful. Like it is so beautiful. I'm about
And what's
halfway
the
through that right
what's the
now.
title of that?
A Sweet Sting of Salt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's coming out. But it's in like I think either March or April of 24. So it's
She
coming
actually
soon.
isn't that far away, but
Not at all. I know. It's funny when I got my publication date for this. December 23 seems so far away, but now it's
mhm.
like
Yeah.
tomorrow. I mean, not tomorrow, but let me think. I had something else that I read recently that was so good. But yeah, I've been on like this huge Simone James kick lately. Um,
Have you
I'm in
ever
the
gone
hmm?
back and read the classic Gothics like Victoria Holt or Mary Stuart or
Not, and I know this is probably going to revoke my Gothic card, but I have not actually read Rebecca. I have,
all
I
right,
know,
we have to end the conversation,
I
right?
know I'm in trouble. You're like, you're done, Jessica. You're done. But no, I know it's like, it's shameful. Like I watched Rebecca
Hmm.
and I haven't read it. And I'm going to have
It
to go fix
happens.
that.
Yeah.
But for me, like my reading time, like I have just like a finite amount of reading and my pile gets
Yes.
larger and larger. And
Hmm.
so like sometimes if I watch something, I may not read it right away, but
Yeah.
I will fix this before I'm kicked out of the
No,
Gothic club.
you have that opportunity waiting you. We'll put it that way instead of you haven't finished it.
I'm waiting for the moment. But no,
I'll be
no, I know.
interested to
I'm
see.
ashamed.
Yeah, she's an author like you that really kind of doesn't play in just one genre. She likes to blur the lines, so you see a lot of things happening in many of her books.
It's one of my favorite things about books. Like I love a genre blending book
Does
because
that make it more challenging for, does your publicist say, why can't you just write a mystery? Why can't you just write? It's harder to market to readers because, or does it kind of open the door to other readers saying, well, I normally don't read mysteries, but I like the historical period, so I'll try it.
we'll see. We'll see. So far, I plan to stay kind of in this lane as long as people want to read them. And I think there's a readership out there for it. I mean,
Mhm.
this is the stuff that I was looking for. And like I'm finding it. And like when I find it, I like grab on, like, ooh, it's another one. And
Mhm.
so like I'm really happy to kind of be in this niche. And hopefully readers also want to read in that niche, because I'm happy to write there as long as people will read it.
Well, I was very happy to discover it. It reminded me a lot of, I was a big fan of Barbara Michaels and Elizabeth Peters and her books that she wrote in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And she kind of also, especially as Barbara Michaels, would blend romance with a whisper of superstition or supernatural and suspense and things like that. Before we run out of time, and I can't believe how quickly it's gone by, this is up to you how much, or if you're even willing to tell us about what might be coming next from you as an author.
Yeah. So about in fall of 24, so next year, the next Ruby Vaughn book will be coming
Oh, she's
out.
coming back. Oh, good.
Coming back. Ruby is going to Scotland, speaking of Scotland, with Mr. Owen, and it's going to be an adventure.
Is her bookseller antiquarian friend still along for the ride?
Mr. Owen?
Yeah.
Yes, he's coming. Mr. Owen's coming. And the Peller will make an appearance as well. He is also coming for reasons. So
that's great.
it will be an adventure.
Aside from writing, you have another life outside that. I heard that you have a passion for cheese. What is that about?
I love cheese. Can anyone not love cheese? But yeah, no, yeah, I love cheese. It's probably unhealthy. I literally have like a coffee mug with cheese on it. It's cheese and sheep. It's really kind of sad. But we have some friends here in New Orleans, and we go and we'll get like cheese, and we'll have cheese dates. It's really kind of sad. 2 years ago, because my husband also does documentary stuff and oral histories, he was doing oral histories with cheesemakers. And so we actually spent a month in the UK while he was interviewing cheesemakers. I was eating the cheese. It was amazing. So I'm always happy to go along. If there's cheese, I'm there.
That's the perfect marriage. How can readers learn more about you and your books? Are you on social media? Do you have a website?
I am. My website is writingjess.com, and I am on Instagram and Threads, and the site formerly that was Twitter, but I'm less active there nowadays. But I'm at JessL_Armstrong on all three of those.
That's wonderful. This time has just flown by. We've been very fortunate to have with us Jess Armstrong, whose first published book, The Curse of Penryth Hall, will be out in just mere days in December. Order a copy from the Poison Pen or from your local independent bookstore, or suggest your library purchase it. It's truly a unique and remarkable book. I'd like to thank Jess for taking time to be with us today, and for everyone listening in, thank you for joining the Poison Pen for another author chat.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.